We are back again for Romford Horror 2024. We have just seen a short movie called Vestige and a feature called Punch, two fantastic movies. Do me a favour guys, make my job a lot easier. Tell people who you are and what you did on your respective movies. Which ones they were.
I'm Lewis Coates, I'm the producer of Vestige.
I'm Andy Edwards, I wrote, directed Punch, I also co-produced it.
So, why did you make me want to hate Punch? Like, why am I scared of him now?
I mean, if you weren't scared of him before, then maybe you didn't see a puppet show as a kid. It was one of those things that it didn't take a huge amount to turn him into a horror character. In the children's entertainment puppet show, he beats his wife, he beats his child, he beats a policeman. It's only when a crocodile eats him that he gets his comeuppance. So he's already a pretty horrible bastard. So yeah, it didn't take a huge amount to turn him into a horror character.
So is that why you were like, right, I'm going to turn this into a horror movie, we're going to do this? Like, is it something you've always kind of thought, I'm going to do that one day?
No, actually, the setting came first. It kind of came from an idea that I had, or two ideas I had. One idea was to do a very British slasher movie, because I wanted to try and create like a British slasher franchise character. And I had all sorts of terrible ideas, like maybe he wears a Union Jack outfit and has a bowler hat. Just terrible ideas. But completely separately, I wanted to do a movie set in a seaside town in winter. I've always been fascinated by that kind of melancholy, windswept vibe. And then I went, okay, maybe the slasher movie should be in the seaside town. And then it just popped into my head, Mr. Punch, well, he's got to be the killer. And I looked at it, I thought someone's got to have done it. And there's been like killer puppet movies and stuff, but nobody's done it as a slasher before. So I was like, shit, there you go, that's it. It kind of writes itself.
And Lewis, what can you tell us about the birth of Vestige and where this came from? Because it's a great little short with an awesome little message, and then of course we get that ending, which we won't spoil, but where did Vestige come from?
Yeah, so Joe really wanted to kind of explore the idea of obsession, characters that kind of get obsessed with different aspects and kind of go on that journey that kind of gets progressively worse and worse towards the ending. There was also the idea of exploring grief, and particularly how men don't really talk about grief and emotions. So it's kind of an exploration of kind of three male characters, the dad kind of going missing, and the lack of communication between the grandfather and the grandson. So that was kind of the kind of initial setup for it, and then he obviously finds this fossil, becomes obsessed that he thinks his dad's kind of communicating with him. So kind of an exploration of lots of different things, but then you've got the kind of horror, supernatural kind of dread kind of constantly there throughout it all.
And your cast is fantastic. The little lad, and I absolutely loved him. I thought he was brilliant. And then you have Eric. He's in there as well.
Yeah,
how did you go about getting? Yeah, I couldn't remember his name. How did you go about getting this cast together?
Yeah, I think Steve Evans, who we had as the grandfather, Joe had in mind when he kind of wrote it. He's typically at the moment he's in Brassic, so he's in kind of big comedy roles, which was quite interesting to have quite a pared back kind of grandfather character for him. But that was someone who Joe kind of had in mind when he was writing the character. We had a good casting call for Ben Hackett, who we had in the end for the character of Lucas. We wanted someone that had that kind of vulnerability. There's not loads of dialogue for him, but he had such a kind of expressive kind of face. He was going through quite a lot of different stages of grief, of kind of discovery, with finding the fossil. So it was there was quite a lot to do, but not a lot of dialogue. So kind of finding the right person for that took a while, but I think Ben's great.
And for Punch, we have a young cast of fresh faces, but we also had some British kind of stalwarts, really. Kirsten Mirren being in there, and Jamie Lomas and all that. How did you go about casting for this?
It's a real mix of a cast in here. So the three kind of young leads, Alina, Macaulay, and Faye, that was all their first feature, and they came through the audition process, through sending in self-tapes, doing an audition, They just were the best three. But then because they were so, raw to it all, I knew I wanted some, a bit more experience in there. So I spoke with my casting director, Ashleen, and we were like, okay, let's try and think who could be good and who might want to do an indie film. And Kirsten Waring, it was literally, I described the character to the casting director. I said, someone like the mum from Fish Tank. That would be what she'd be like. And then she went, I'm going to see what the mum from Fish Tank is actually doing. And yeah, she was, she had a few days free. And if you've got people in mind, if they're not working, these people love to do it. And Jamie Lomas, obviously he's in Hollyoaks, which is, pretty much a full-time job. But I think he had 2 weeks off from Hollyoaks, which he was doing a film in London. And he had 2 days off from that film in London, and he did hours. So he could have just, gone and sat on the beach somewhere, but he just loves to work and, help indie filmmakers out and everything. And so he came, did a couple of days, it was great. And then just to finish off, we've got a couple of people who probably, anyone from this festival will recognise, like Danny Thompson and Aviana Snow, and maybe Sarah Marks you might know, or May Kelly, who's in Winnie the Pooh. So people who I knew and had done low budget horror stuff before. So they filled out the supporting cast.
This Punch for me screams franchise. Is this something you're planning on trying to do?
I mean, you've said the magic words. Because when I was trying to come up with a British slasher character, it wasn't to come up with one film. It was to try and come up with something, because we don't have a British Freddy, Jason or whatever. And the Winnie the Pooh guys have actually probably done that now, because they've just done number 2. But until then, A, we didn't have the strong enough characters, but B, we often don't think in franchise terms in this country. Whenever a film is successful, the next thing that somebody does is something completely different. Whereas maybe in the States, what are you going to do? Are you going to do another one of them? So, the plan is to do Punch 2, Punch 3, Punch 4, Punch 5. By Punch 10, I want him in space.
Went for Jason. And Lewis, one of the things that I saw was that you got BFI funding for Vestige, with you being a producer, it'd be good to ask about that. How does that work for any budding filmmakers? And how does it work approaching that and securing it?
Yeah, I think funding in general is quite an elusive, difficult thing, and I think in a lot of ways it's only getting harder. I think I had already done a BFI creative producers course, so I had at least knew a couple of the commissioners. I think this was probably my 4th or 5th year of applying to stuff before it kind of worked, and I think you kind of gain experience there of like what works, what doesn't. So for this, we actually got some kind of pre-funding. We worked with a few paleontology societies and fossil hunting kind of things, because I thought, trying to think out of the box funding-wise of like how do we get this film made. And it's obviously not an educational tool as such, but it's looking at fossil hunting in a way that kind of gets young people interested and shows it in a kind of cinematic way. So we managed to get probably about £6 grand of funding as a kind of starting point, and then kind of went to the BFI asking for less at that point. So I think it's a tricky thing to kind of go there asking for all the money for when you've got nothing. We after a few attempts we thought out of the box and tried to do it that way. But they were collaborative in the end. Very I think having the stamp of approval is nice, but it was kind of good to work through that process of working with a bigger kind of exec producer and that kind of thing, really.
And how does that work in terms of if you want to blow this up into a feature, or does that help?
I'd like to think so, yeah. We have recently applied to development funding with Vestige as a feature through the BFI, so we're still waiting. I think it's probably like 2% of what, of success, so we've got some backups if not. But yeah, we've spent, since we started doing the festival run, we've had kind of different ideas of where to take it. I think it's interesting as a short to feature of whether you kind of just stretch the short into a feature length, or if you kind of look at it a different way and go, maybe that's the first 20 minutes, where else can the story go? I kind of see them as quite two separate
We're going to move out to the audience in a second, but first of all, I do want to ask one silly little question. Who would you rather, guys, face in a horror movie? A Chucky-sized Jason or a Jason-sized Chucky?
I think a Chucky-sized Jason, really, because Jason kind of derives his power from his size and strength. So when he doesn't have that, I think you just kick him in the head.
I think I'd agree. I'd still be running though, I think.
Chucky's scary as hell. Right, do we have any questions in the audience?
So I have two, one for each director. The first one is for Punch. I'm quite a local person. I've actually spotted some of the locations you've used, such as Clacton. And I was wondering, in the sense that you wanted to make it a slasher, in my sense, is this more or less the British version of the Scream franchise in a sense? Because I kind of get those kind of themes as I'm watching this, but kind of more heightened because I know the settings in the country.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you recognise some places. So yeah, it was, most of the shoot was done in Hastings, but then we went to Clacton for a few days to get some other stuff, like most of the pier stuff is in Clacton. Because we shot on Hastings Pier, but it recently burnt down, so there was, and then rebuilt, but there was nothing on it, so there was no rides or anything, so it didn't really work. So yeah, we went to Clacton and did some stuff there, and quite a lot of the opening sequences shot there as well, with all the different houses and streets and the arcades and things. So I had a lot of fun shooting there. It's a lovely place. But in terms of, we were talking earlier, do I want it to be a franchise? Absolutely. And Scream was a big influence, Halloween was a big influence. I wanted to do an American slasher formula, which is teenagers in peril on a night out and a man in a mask, but in the most British setting imaginable. So that's kind of how Punch came about, and that was always on set. We were like, we're doing Mike Leigh's Halloween. That's that was kind of the mantra of how we kind of described it to people.
And then, sorry, the second question I had for Bertie, I can't pronounce the name, sorry.
Vestige.
That's it. I feel like it really would work as a feature length because I did quite like the story, but I felt like the character dynamic between the grandfather and the son needed further context. However, if you was able to get the funding from BFI, as someone who's pitched to them before, I know it's quite understandably difficult. But what direction would you be looking to go into this? Would you be looking into going into a single movie, or if it gets successful enough, would you maybe do it as a franchise, but do it as like a prequel, so you know the history of the fossil war?
Yeah, I think probably we'll see what Joe thinks about franchise. I'm sure he would, definitely like the idea. I think for me it's thinking about what's the best way to tell that story. I think the way we've been looking at it at the moment is kind of having the short as the first kind of 20 minutes, and then Lucas goes missing, and then you're left with the grandfather and the community, and kind of looking at the grandfather trying to kind of solve the mystery. At that point he's lost his grandson and his son, and he's kind of left to uncover the kind of truth himself. I think in terms of the fossil history and stuff, I guess it's how much leaving it ambiguous is more interesting and how much needs to be kind of explained. I think there's probably a careful balance in terms of the lore of cinema and how much you kind of leave up to the audience's kind of imagination. But
Anyone else?
Oh, go. Okay, as you said about making more Punch films, would you go for the murders in a more visceral and gory manner?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously for number 2, because I have to ramp up the body count, ramp up the blood. That's the law of sequels. As anyone who's watched Scream 2 will tell you, the law of sequels. Obviously, we made a low-budget film. There was a million things I would have loved to do with a bigger budget, but that's why I'm writing number 2, and I'm writing some bigger set pieces in. And the plan would be to go like the Terrifier route, where obviously you had a super low-budget original, then we got a bit more money for the second, and the money went on practical effects. And that's where I put it, absolutely, yeah. So number 2, which I'm writing, is kind of, yeah, bigger, bloodier, just kind of putting all the things in that I couldn't put in that one.
Absolutely.
I just like seeing people get their face smashed in and their heads explode.
Yeah, I mean, that'll happen, don't worry. When we've got the money, that's going to happen.
So no more drinks for that guy. Yep.
So just going off the Punch franchise route, obviously most franchises, there's usually a main antagonist. Because you've got Punch, obviously I'm guessing as the antagonist, would you ideally introduce someone, I don't know, obviously you've got the crocodile that eventually kills Punch, would you feel someone in to kind of fill that role as the overall antagonist for a couple of future sequels?
I mean, one thing that we don't see in Punch 1, which we will see in Punch 2, is a character called the Professor. So basically, in a Punch and Judy puppet show, the guy who did the puppets and, you know, literally manipulated them was called the Professor. And when Punch is on the phone, you'll see that's who he's calling. We don't see him in the film, but you'll see him in number 2. So you'll see literally the guy pulling the strings.
Oh, and on that note, so yeah, guys, thank you so much for submitting the movies to us, letting us show you here today, and of course for being here and doing this. So, thank you.
Thank you for watching, everyone. Thank you.